going live.
Hi there. Welcome to this first webinar of the Ecsite. This is exciting because I can't see that that you now can all see me, but I just believe it. And when it says live 14 seconds that we're there. My name is Anna Schäfers. I'm a curator of education with the Federal Museums in Berlin. This is Ampi. Say who you are if you want to.
Hello, good morning. So good to see people on the chat and knowing that our colleagues, friends, family are here with us to have this conversation.
Yes. Some of you have already seen that we have a poll at the bottom of your screens. We would love for you to put in your opinions on your knowledge in there. And it's interesting for us that you do this perhaps now at the beginning, because then we can ask you again one of those questions later on when you've heard our presentations. Also use the chat if you want to ask us questions, and if it prompts you to ask this as a question, it will go to the bottom, to the ask a question thing, and you can also put in your questions there, and you can upvote other people's questions so that we have something to talk about in the question and answers part of this session. I want to say a big thank you to the people at the Ecsite who helped us. Wilkes, Raquel Acuña, Elvira Redondo, who really helped us with the setup of this thing. If anything goes wrong with the technology, it's not their fault. And Niko Milikowski and Vasil Dunet, who were our guardian angels for this session. So thank you to them. Now, we're going to talk about decolonization today. In British schools, you have the 3 R's that you learn: reading, writing, arithmetic. It turns out there's lots more R's in decolonization. You have restitution, repatriation, reparation, reconciliation, representation, recognition, reform, and reinterpretation. And that's what we're going to hear about today. I would now like to invite Bärbel to toggle her video so she can come back on. Let's see if this works. Come back, Bärbel!
I do.
Bärbel? Come and join us, Bärbel. Yes, there she is. Very good.
Yeah, hello.
Ampis is the one who's sharing all the screens, so I'm going to disappear just for now, and the stage is yours, Bärbel. She's director of the Neanderthal Museum in Mettmann, Germany.
Yes, hello. I'm speaking to you from Germany, from the Neanderthal Museum, as Anna just said. Our museum is located at the world-famous site where the Neanderthal man was found. Waiting for my presentation. In our museum, we have human evolution as a central theme. Our permanent exhibition presents human evolution from its earliest beginnings to the present day. Ampis, I'm one sheet behind now. Maybe you can go a bit faster. So you might assume that I am talking about the repatriation of human remains today. That could be obvious, but it is not my topic. I will not be talking about bones, because here in Neanderthal we do not own any anthropological collection. I would like to make it clear in my talk that the topic of decolonization is not one that only concerns ethnographic museums, but one that every institution should reflect on. In our museum, we point to the perspective to humanity as a diverse community that is subject to constant change. Adaptability, diversity, and change have been the decisive parameters of human evolution for millions of years. This hominin family bush, graphic from our museum, with the white branch lines in the background, illustrates the non-linear development of human evolution. Climate changes and migrations have led to our diverse genetic mosaic, which has never been and never will be static. People move and mix. since they walk on two legs. It's as easy as this is. Since the opening of our museum in 1996 and until an update in 2016, we have presented evolution in our exhibition in such a linear way. To illustrate this, we already had reconstructions of hominids in our old galleries, as you see here, made by the French sculptor Elisabeth Inès. From today's point of view, these reconstructions are all too fair-skinned. We know that even the Neanderthals still had dark skin. Light skin is a very young mutation, only probably 5,000 years old. I remember one day I showed the museum to an African-American journalist, and I said to myself, oh my God, how embarrassing. 99% of human history is dark-skinned, and we only show light-skinned figures. We have changed this since the last permanent exhibition update in 2016. What you see here is our walk-in family bush, which shows that today we are the result of migrations and genetic mixing. The visitors meet their ancestors, perceive the long period of our evolution. Highlights of these installations are 6 lifelike reconstructions of important human fossil finds. So I felt very good, but then came the so-called refugee crisis 5 years ago, and we thought that we had something to say about that. For us as archaeologists, migration is a recurring phenomenon in our history. We want to show that by looking back to our early beginnings as human beings, one can take a more relaxed look at current events. So we developed the exhibition 2 Million Years of Migration, which we first showed 3 years ago and which has since been touring as a traveling exhibition. Again, this was a success and we felt great. We felt that we could say something to present events like the refugee crisis, that we took our stand as archaeologists. We just felt comfortable in our wonderful museum. But during recent Ecsite conferences, I became aware that diversity should not be limited to content. You do not just welcome someone at your doorstep, but long before that. It came to me somewhat like a shock that I realized that our expensive and very hot off the press advertisement campaign that we just get off excluded all non-indigenous German people as visitors. Photos like this one are very nice. It's a very nice family, but they do not reflect our society. Germany is much more colorful than blonde and blue-eyed. And these women also could be potential museum visitors who should feel welcome. So we decided to do a new photo shooting with much more diverse visitors. We are now using photos like this one in our advertising for posters, flyers, for social media, internet, and so on. And this photo leads me back to our new family bush installation we felt so comfortable with. We felt very honored when a respected fashion photographer asked us to shoot a story for the designer label Gucci, staging our reconstructions with a light-skinned, red-haired model. We liked the idea behind that we are all of African origin, and not so long ago we were dark-skinned. We had a great day carrying the figures and helping on the set. And we thought the photographs were just beautiful. However, they led to very different public reactions. People found the model with light skin in Gucci clothes versus reconstructions with dark skin and simple natural clothing provocative, inappropriate, and racist. As experts for human evolution, dark-skinned naked ancestors are a matter of course for us. The figures were created by the 2 Dutch artists, Adrie and Alphonse Kennis. If it were up to them, we would show all the figures completely naked to highlight their detailed and lifelike work in all its perfection. You can imagine that openly shown nudity in the exhibition can lead to conflict with families and also people of other religions. The reconstructions are all scientifically reconstructed on the basis of real finds. However, Only the figure of Homo sapiens is fully closed due to Ice Age circumstances. This may give the wrong impression that only we, the light-skinned, were clever enough to make clothes, and the dark-skinned ancestors were backward and therefore mostly naked. This was of course not so, and we did not intend this message. But it's not easy to represent the human family. We museum people must therefore constantly review our own viewpoint, remain self-critical, and weigh up how we can portray diversity without irritating some groups of visitors or even provoking misinterpretations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barbara. I'm handing the screen over directly to Dr. Elizabeth Rasikoala, who is president of African Gong, the network, the Pan-African Network for the Popularization of Science and Technology in Science Communication. Once more, go and ask questions. Hi to everyone who's already doing that. Thank you. And Liz will come on shortly, so I will just keep you a little more. I'm very happy that lots of you have heard about the terms restitution, repatriation, reparation, that you're voting on restitution, and you're very progressive. Thank you for that. So, Liz, the floor is yours.
Hi, have you got my slides up, please?
They're coming real soon.
Hello, everyone. Different time zones, and I'm delighted that Ecsite has provided us this alternative opportunity to engage in these discussions. I'm going to be looking at the issue of decolonizing museums and science communication from a different context in terms of looking at issues of challenges and opportunities for transformation. The first challenge that we need to talk about is how do we overcome the challenges of the legacy of hegemonic Eurocentric ideology, given that most, if not all, of the African exhibits housed in European museums are the legacy of the colonial era ideology of the colonial enterprise, racism, exploitation, extraction of natural and human resources, and the subjugation of indigenous cultures and languages. The second challenge in how we overcome the legacy is to recognize that many of these African artifacts that have been presented superficially as cultural, artistic, or heritage objects have highly significant scientific value and show the scientific advancements and innovations in various parts of Africa at a time when Europe was supposedly in the Dark Ages. The other challenge is that of pseudo-historical memory that resides in Europe. And these African exhibits, when assessed through a decolonized lens, pose a challenge to the marginalization of African contributions to scientific advancement. And this long-standing dominant narrative of Eurocentric hegemony in the development of scientific knowledge globally, which we know is not quite the full picture. Next slide. And so what I will be doing here is highlighting two significant African exhibits, the Shango bone and the Benin bronzes, to illustrate how decolonized narratives and perspectives can radically transform how African exhibits should be presented, valued, and communicated in European museums. Next slide. Yes, so the Shango bone is about 20,000 years old. It was unearthed in 1950 in the Congo region of Africa, which at that time was a colony of Belgium. It is now housed permanently in the Museum of Natural Sciences in Brussels in Belgium. And it's a bone made from a fibula of a large mammal. It has a piece of quartz at one end for writing and engraving with markings that correlate to prime numbers. So again, a very early example of mathematical achievement in Africa. But in terms of the Eurocentric perspectives in which it is communicated, it's talked about in culture, in archaeology, in antiquity, as a primitive talistic, but the history of mathematics itself ignores the history of mathematics in sub-Saharan Africa. And even the bit about Egypt that is acknowledged is racially contextualized. There's still this sense that the ancient Egyptians who built the pyramids could not have been Africans that looked like me. So we still have this racial contestation, even where there is recognition. And how can we turn that round to decolonize perspectives? The Shango bones could be seen as as showing Africa as the cradle of mathematics. It is undisputed that they are the world's oldest evidence of advanced mathematics. A calculator, the oldest table of prime numbers, proving that Africans have indeed created, developed, and mastered what we know as mathematics. And they could be part of a basket of globally inclusive exemplars in mathematics that we could use to attract and engage diverse audiences to European museums. The second exhibit are the Benin bronzes. And this is a generic term referring to a large, diverse collection of bronze, brass, and copper objects looted by the British Army in 1897 from the ancient kingdom of Benin. The largest collection is housed in the British Museum and smaller collections in Europe and North America. They were made from the 13th century onwards using the lost wax method. These are my two favorite ones because here you've got a male and a female. The Benin Kingdom, just like other parts of the world, also had issues in terms of gender equality. So we don't have many images of females. And again, the Eurocentric perspectives in their narratives, religious artifacts, decorative artifacts. And again, you put that into a history of science and technology narrative that ignores science and technology in Africa and continues to perpetuate a narrative of Africans as stereotypically portrayed as lacking in the higher order intelligence requisite for science and technology advancement. We see this regularly in science, race, and intelligence research that props up from time to time. But how could we turn this around in decolonized perspectives and narratives? We're looking at a diverse variety of metals, even bronze as an alloy, utilized in Benin bronzes. This showcases advanced knowledge of metallurgical science in Africa over a timeline in history when the Vikings roamed Northern Europe. The lost wax method used in casting the bronze objects evidences high-level technical skills and expertise of African artisans at the time. And the images exemplify the sophisticated aesthetics of the Benins, their wealth, their stability, their African creativity. So when we come to the heart of the challenge of decolonizing museums and science communication, what are the transformation drivers? Equity, restitution, and reconciliation, as I would define them. And that's against the backdrop of the pseudo-historical memory, which has denied Africans their rightful and long overdue recognition and historical legacy as critical contributors to innovation and scientific advancement. The question of how, if or when, African objects collected in colonial context should be returned is a challenging one, and one which I think should be addressed in terms of issues around restitution, ethics, political dimensions, and one that should be addressed in an empowering framework. So moving on from there, how do we recalibrate the critique of global inequalities in the representations and power asymmetries in science communication elicit two profound decolonizing questions. What would the development trajectory of STEM innovation on the African continent have been if it had not been so systematically? Sorry, can we go back to that last slide, please? Hello? Yes. So what would the development trajectory of STEM innovation on the African continent have been if it had not been so systematically disrupted and undermined by colonialism, as exemplified by the wholesale transfer of its innovation and knowledge assets to European museums? And what enhanced leverage have Europeans gained from the acquisition of these African innovation and knowledge assets over such a long period of time? These questions and the answers really become a point of departure for us to recalibrate Eurocentric hegemony in science communication and truly begin to deliver decolonization in knowledge, in science. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liz. People in the chat said, bravo, Liz, so many great points. So I'm sure there's going to be interesting questions for you later on. Just for everyone who was asking, where's the sound go? I read in the chat that the sound was gone on the app, but it can still be heard if you're on a PC or on a laptop. So if you have the possibility, go there for the sound to come back. We are now inviting Micah Parson from the Museum of Man in San Diego on screen. So you have here people from 3 different continents sitting on 3 different continents presenting to you. And a big thank you from my side again to Ampis and Micah, for whom it is now 6:30 in the morning. So thank you for everyone who is here at a weird time for them. I'm waiting for Micah to come on, but I'm sure that's going to work fine. I'm reading, will slides be available afterwards? At least Liz's presentation will be available afterwards. We'll have to, I'll talk to the speakers again if we want to bring their Pecha Kuchas on here as well. But we're going to give you a link later on that will, sorry, trying to read the conversation on another device, that will give you some reading advice or some reading hints for what you can do. Also, as the Ecsite just commented, that would be Raquel or Helen. Everyone can rewatch this webinar afterwards. And there we have Micah. Hello, Micah. Thank you for being with us. He's the CEO of the Museum of Man. He's the only man in our session, and we're glad to have him. The floor's yours.
Good morning, at least in San Diego, everybody. Very honored to be here. The Museum of Man is an anthropology museum, and our mission is inspiring human connections by exploring the human experience. So I am just waiting for my slideshow to come up, and then we'll get going.
Micah, Ampis has a small problem with her Wi-Fi, so we're trying to find a solution here. If you're ever doing webinars like this, it's always good to have a second channel where you can read what is going on. But we know that Helen might has the presentation as well, and if all else fails, I will try and bring on the presentation. Trying to find out what's going on here, or trying to read, just give it a bit of time. Look at the polls, ask a question, upvote the questions just to see what you find interesting. Just bear with us for a second. Yes, Helen is writing 1 sec. She will be on with the connection very soon. One of the questions in the poll was, how do we continue this important work during COVID? This is one of the things probably. How do we continue when technology fails us? What is there but technology? We just listen to each other. I'm sure we'll also watch things soon. Helen says, invite you on. I guess Raquel can do that because I'm not the convener. I'm the convener, but I'm not the administrator. So I can't do that. Done. Okay. Soon things will be happening.
Hello, everybody. I'm here with the presentation. Bear with me 1 second.
Thank you so much, Helen.
Okay. Can you see?
Oh, and there should be a separate slideshow in addition to the bumper slide. There we go. Yeah, we're ready. In her recent Financial Times article, "The Pandemic is a Portal," Arundhati Roy writes, "What is this thing that has happened to us? It is a virus, yes, but it is definitely more than a virus. And in the midst of this terrible despair, it offers us a chance to rethink the doomsday machine we have built for ourselves. Nothing could be worse than a return to normality. Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew." I think the slide is not moving forward. Thank you. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. As Roy suggests, this is a crisis for sure, but it's also an opportunity. It's an important opportunity to emerge as a better version of ourselves. Decolonization offers one handhold as we are navigating this vortex we are all in. It shines an important light for how we might find our way through the portal and ultimately to the other side. At the San Diego Museum of Man, which sits on the ancestral homelands of the Kumeyaay Nation, where I have served as the CEO for the past 10 years, we recognize that many museums, including ours, emerged from the colonial endeavor and the self-righteous belief that to the victor go the spoils. The colonizers, in turn, felt entitled to extract the cultural, environmental, and human resources of the colonized. Many cultural resources ended up in museums like ours, which wasted no time in asserting their authoritative expertise, not only over the artifacts, but also over Native and Indigenous peoples themselves. The paradigm of museum as expert over the other has largely justified our existence for 100 years. Decolonizing is a practice of shifting that paradigm. It's a process of recognizing and holding ourselves accountable and actively working to redress the traumatic legacy of colonialism. Central to this effort is undoing systems of oppression that unwittingly continue to perpetuate those traumas today. So where do we start in this effort towards decolonized ways of thinking? I will give 3 departure points that are particularly appropriate for science endeavors. First, we have to hire Native and Indigenous staff, as well as other peoples of color, and bring them onto our boards of trustees. We have to ensure they occupy leadership positions, as well as positions that have decision-making power, and ensure they have line items in their budget that correspond to those decisions. As Thomas Kuhn wrote in The Structure of Scientific Revolution, what man sees depends both on what he looks at and also on what his previous visual conception experience has taught him to see. Hiring Native and Indigenous staff along with other peoples of color and holding a space where they can share their perspective paves the way for new ways of seeing and thus new solutions. Second, we have to take a look at the traumatic legacy of colonialism within our own museums, as difficult as that may be. All of our organizations emerged out of some aspect of the colonial endeavor and contribute to its continuing trauma, whether intentionally or unintentionally. We have to begin to tell the truth about that and find a way to make it right. How were the items that your museum stewards acquired and from whom? Was it a level playing field? Does your institution have a history of displaying human remains? If so, have you obtained informed consent from the descendant community? Who has access to items, the original owners or only the PhD researchers? Does the language you use reproduce colonial hierarchies? Like most museums for decades, we referred to the items we steward as collections, a nod to the people who acquired them, often under untoward circumstances. Now we call them cultural resources, as a way of honoring the people who have made, used, and imbued the items with meaning. Does your museum sit on what was ever indigenous land? In the United States, the answer is always yes. For over 100 years, however, the Museum of Man ignored that fact. Now we acknowledge and express gratitude to the Kumeyaay Nation whenever and wherever we can. It's a simple but important act of remembering. We also now recognize the impact of marketing, language, and design in creating an inclusive and welcoming workspace. In addition to bringing land acknowledgements and institutional truth-telling into our materials, we no longer use designs that evoke colonial imagery that both embody and reproduce trauma for Indigenous visitors. We are also realizing that many of our human resources practices are problematic. We long offered 14 paid holidays per year, but several of those holidays are rooted in a colonial paradigm. We're now revising our policy to allow employees to choose holidays in ways that are meaningful to them. And third, we have to ask whether our institutions have made space for other ways of knowing and being beyond Western understandings of science. We generally have a false dichotomy between belief and knowledge. What we in the West have, namely science, we think of as knowledge, and what others have is belief. But Native and Indigenous peoples, of course, do not see those as beliefs. Rather, those are knowledge systems supported by different types of evidence, origin stories, oral histories, prayers passed on from generation to generation. We have an opportunity to honor them as such, and doing so doesn't have to negate science. Like the prophecy of the eagle and the condor, which teaches us that there will be a time when indigenous ways of knowing, represented by the condor, and Western ways of knowing, represented by the eagle, will need to work together to effectively solve the complex problems facing our world. Indeed, perhaps now is that time. Again, to paraphrase Roy, the pandemic is a portal. It's a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it carrying the traumatic legacy of colonialism that has long held us down, or we can reimagine ourselves anew through a decolonizing lens. Let's do that, remembering that there is safety in numbers, particularly when you are doing the right thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Micah. Ampis is now back on, but we have to throw Micah off so we can get her back on, but we will bring you on again for the questions. I've seen some for you in the polls. So bear with me while we find Ampis to be with us again so she can also share the presentation. And then our next speaker is going to be Caroline Thierry from Universcience in Paris, currently in home office in Brittany. I guess some of you are also still watching from home, not in your museums or institutions yet. I'm seeing questions in the Ask a Question box. I'm happy to that you're voting on them as well. I also like your answers on the poll very much, as it shows us we do not have to poll again. We do not actually have to change people's minds for restitution, repatriation. It seems that you're already interested in doing the good work there. So waiting to see what's happening on here. Will someone join me? So happy to see that everyone is also already at least familiar with the terms restitution, repatriation, reparation. Some of them will have appeared, some of them will still appear. And we're getting there. And it's very good that 91% of you think that restitution of objects is only one part of the decolonization project. Amparo cannot add her camera, and Caroline is not in yet, so bear with me. Comment to the people in the background, maybe, try bringing in Caroline again and put in Helen again for the presentations. This is what technology will do for you these days. Everyone is online, what with not being able to go out so much. Also, I read in the questions that someone was deeply disturbed by the name Museum of Man, and I can already tell you that yes, the Museum of Man is in the process of changing the name of that museum. So the patriarchy will get a good hit in that case as well. We still have problems getting Caroline into the chat. People are writing, asking if maybe Helen can bring in Caroline, but I'm not sure she can. So, yes, we are trying. We are trying is what I'm reading. And I'm glad that, and I'm sure that this will be happening soon. This is what happens if you're the first ones. I'm really happy that we're the first ones, because then we can just say, we were happy to be the test objects. We'll make do. This is the point where rewatching the webinar afterwards will be especially interesting, at least for me. So have you heard about the, oh yeah, I've got the thing to pick a question from the poll, from the Q&A. So, well, happy to see that the most upvoted question is mine, because this is what I wanted to hear about. Are you facing obstacles in your decolonization work? What kind, by whom? I can talk to myself about this. I work for the federal museums. I work with the Ethnological Museum and the Museum of Asian Art, who are currently moving to a new location, or are going to start moving to that new location. And let's say we are facing some obstacles on the one hand by laws, because it says, well, these objects belong to the German state and we cannot give them back. Also, it's you have to, the government has to ask to get those things back, which is difficult. Inside the institutions, there are, of course, some people who say, but these objects are safer with us here than they would be in their countries of origin, which I do not necessarily agree with. And there's someone coming on, which is interesting. So yeah, but I know from Micah that his board was giving him some problems, so he worked on getting a new board. But I'm sure if once he comes back, he will also answer that. Let me see if I have any other questions and answers. I saw that Bärbel commented, human remains, that is mummies, be reinterred in their countries of origin. Where Bärbel says, as a scientist, she would not agree. They would get lost for research. Which, on the one hand, I understand. On the other hand, if it was my great-great-grandmother, I might not agree. But the question is, maybe also what kind of age are we talking about? So for the mummies, this is a question of 4,000 years ago. If it's something that in Berlin we have in collections and is maybe just 120 years old, is a different thing. Ampis is asking, should we bring Bärbel back to answer? Well, yes, if for the moment while we're not getting Caroline online, maybe we can get Bärbel back to answer. We could also, if that is possible, bring Micah back to talk about the obstacles he's facing. But my hands are, while not tied, not able to do this. So there we have someone. Hi, Micah.
Hi, Anna. Thank you for bringing me back. Yes, we have faced many obstacles in transitioning to a museum that is in the process of decolonizing. Anna mentioned my board. We have a board of directors of 23 trustees and had to radically change that board so that we brought on a lot more people of color and Native and Indigenous individuals as well onto our staff to help pave the way. In the United States, of course, we are heavily dependent on philanthropic monies to support our endeavors. And that has been one of the biggest challenges in that many people of great wealth had their wealth built up on the backs of Native, Indigenous peoples and other peoples of color. And the idea of upending those systems of oppression that systematically hold down folks is a difficult sell to people with wealth who are wanting to contribute. So it's very much a marathon, not a sprint, in terms of helping people kind of get there over time and finding the right donors.
Thank you. I would suggest, because we've managed to get Caroline back on, that we let her do her presentation. Caroline is the International Affairs Officer at the Universions, and this is just a warning at this point that at 1600 sharp or 4 p.m. CET, we're going to be cut off. So put in your questions and we'll try and answer them in some way. Yeah, thank you. Can someone put on the presentation for Caroline? And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon, and sorry about this technical problem. So my name is Caroline Thuré. I work as an International Affairs Officer, as Anna just said, at Universions Paris, and I am honored to be part of this webinar today. I cannot see my slides yet.
We are working on that, Caroline.
Okay.
I'll join you again. Oh, Hel needs to be invited in by someone who has the right to do that. I'm sure we will manage. Maybe you can start talking about what Universions is,
yeah,
and then we'll make do. We'll just skip aside a page or two of this. Helen,
Yes.
so the presentations are not
Hello,
far away.
bear with me. I'll be there shortly.
Okay. So yes, in a few words, Universions is one organization, but two facilities in Paris. Le Palais de la Découverte, which was created in 1937, and la Cité des Sciences et de l'Industrie, which opened in 1986. Yes. So you can, yeah, perfect. So as a science center, we are not concerned by restitution of artifacts, but as Berbel said, every institution is of course concerned by this issue of decolonization in the museums. So as actor of public engagement and critical thinking, this subject is of great interest and involves us, of course, how to make it match with our missions to highlight and share scientific culture also internationally with values of openness, universality and innovation. Very inspiring research and projects have emerged about the topic, and yet I will only present one initiative and show how it could be a starting point to reverse traditional perspectives. Like in the picture, it is written, "Who said North is located above?" So YOS, outreach programs, festive and popular events, co-creating and building projects. These are the funding principles of Africa 2020 season, who were actually largely echoing our main concerns and have drawn our attention. So what is this Africa 2020 so-called season? It is a cultural event that should have taken place throughout France from June to December this year, but will be postponed in 2021 due to the crisis, of course. It is dedicated to Africa as a whole, and it will shed a new light on the continent and its innovations. In 2017, in Ouagadougou, French President Macron announced the event in a significant speech expressing a will to mark a renewed partnership with Africa, opening, among others, the question of restitution of African heritage to Africa. So this is Ngone Fall. She is the general curator of the season. She is a Senegalese essayist and a cultural policies specialist. She wishes to place this project under the banner of Pan-Africanism and collective intelligence, shaking codes and conventions and opening new perspectives. So one of our goals in participating to Africa 2020 was to include science in this cultural event. It was also an opportunity to open up our venues to the practices of the continent and to develop long-term collaborations. But we had to face many challenges. And how do we speak about Africa as a whole, as the season concerns a very diverse continent of 54 states, over 1.2 billion people, a diaspora of 60 million, and multiple linguistic and cultural areas? And with one of the season's slogans being to see Africa differently, many questions are at stake, of course. What does it imply about the way we spoke about it before? Why do we ask ourselves the question now? We had to start with the first deconstruction phase. This is a picture extracted from a TED talk by Nigerian novelist Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. She speaks in her very inspiring talk about the danger of hearing only one story about another person or a country or a continent, which leads to a critical misunderstanding. And the Atelier de la Pensée, launched in Dakar in 2016 by Felwine Sarr, a Senegalese economist and writer, are workshops whose aim is to gather African intellectuals to think about the future of the continent and more globally the world, calling for decolonization of African minds. So for us, grabbing the opportunity of this season would imply a shift in the methodology of our programming. We have started with prior reflective workshops with researchers and intend to co-build the programming with our partners at the earliest stage. So how to avoid misconceptions? Together with the Institute for Research and Development, which gathers African researchers and French researchers in Africa, we organized group discussions about current research studies and misconceptions, for instance, about migrations, about health. And the next Einstein Forum has been appointed to us by the season as our main partner. It is an initiative by the African Institute for Mathematical Sciences that connects science, society, and policy in Africa. And more globally, it aims at putting Africa on the map of scientific research. Naturally, we intend to work with the African Networks for Science Communication, African Gong with Elizabeth, of course, names for Northern Africa, SASTEC in South Africa. We would like the science communicators to have direct interaction with our public and exchange best practices. I said it, we would like to associate our partners to the definition of our programming. Some of those professionals will be welcomed a few months in our teams to bring their inputs and their perspectives to start a long-term collaborative project to be extended after Africa 2020. So that was the plan. So special program with festivals, conferences, meaning to attract a very large audience, and then the chaos of COVID-19 happened, which totally upset the preparation. But what is happening is actually right into our topic because it highlights the dynamism of the African tech, which contributes to the prevention and tracing. And for instance, this Kenyan application, Ushahidi, realizes social map making through crowdsourcing, and it has been reused in Italy, in Peru, or in Japan during the crisis. and the public debate between African scientists, intellectuals is teeming. Many of them are calling for a change of model for the common good. And I think partnering with them during the season, especially within this context, can raise a collective awareness about those issues of representation and recognition about the continent and the need for a deeper transformation. So I thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to your questions. You have your microphone.
From the things that I'm reading here in the comments and questions and answers, and also in the chat, can you say something about, does something at Universcience happen concerning diversifying your staff just to be able to make some of those things that are not yet going right more obvious?
Yes, actually, we are one of the first public institution to have had a label on equity and diversity for the staff delivered by the French government last year. But of course, it doesn't mean everything is solved. It awards those labels awards as to have an active policy to have a staff more representative. But in fact, it helps identifying weak points and helping to find solutions. So yes, there is this issue is considered, of course, and we have a more generally a whole department in charge of accessibility for all visitors, including, of course, this question of minorities and diversity. So these are topics we are actively working on.
Okay. We're trying to get either or Bärbel and Liz online again to ask Bärbel the same question, and also maybe let then Liz talk about what she's facing. Just at this moment, because in 7 minutes we'll be cut off, there's a button at the bottom of your screen that says visit the Google Drive folder with resources, where we've put some resources for you. Bärbel, what are you doing to get your staff more diverse?
Yes, we are aware of it, that we are not diverse enough, at least a bit. One problem is that our team is rather young. So, but when we are looking for new positions, when we are having job advertisements, we have different formulations now. We're looking for more diverse. One of my colleagues has had a training as a diversity trainer. She's sensibilized towards this, but it's a long way to go. Stuff really it's a long way to go.
Unmuting myself. Thank you, Bärbel. Liz, can you talk about what obstacles you're facing in your cooperation with Eurocentric or European museums? Also, can you talk about how you, from the questions and answers box, how do you effectively repatriate power and gaze within institutional museum structures? What is your doing? How do you hit people to work on that?
Yes, I think the starting point really is having what I would call open conversations and creating a safe and enabling environment for all colleagues to be able to look at these issues from different perspectives. I think the issue of the challenge of power asymmetries is something that many people take for granted and do not even realize. Women tend to be able to pick it up much more quickly than men, because within the whole gender inequality paradigm, women seem to be much more sensitive to picking up the dynamics of power inequalities more than men. So you find that there's a kind of a gendered nature, and organizations that are led by women tend to find it much easier to get on board with these issues than organizations that are led by men. And in terms of the different contexts of changing the power and changing the narratives, as I said in my presentation, a big challenge is what we call pseudo-historical memory. There's a lot of long-standing false historical myths. There's a lot of ingrained patronizing attitudes as to the nature of these collections. I mean, I've even had institutions say, but if we return these objects to African institutions, will they actually be able to take care of them? I mean, come on. I mean, how can you suggest that in this day and age, African institutions would not be able to have the resources and the expertise to be able to take care and to be able to preserve and showcase these African collections? So these are the kind of challenges that we face. And there are political leadership issues as well that make this a difficult thing. In some countries, like France, where you've got the president standing on platforms and leading the charge from the front, it's made it a lot easier to have those kind of conversations with French institutions. But in other countries, without that sort of political leadership, individual institutions are basically left to flounder, to find their own way, and to see what they can do with the leadership of their institutions. So I don't know if that helps to kind of answer those questions.
Thank you very much, Liz. Micah, can you give us, what are you doing in your institution once more for, concerning power imbalances? How are you empowering your staff, maybe specifically your female staff who might have other solutions than the people who usually were in charge?
Yeah, we try to create a wide variety of fora to allow for voices to be heard and ensure that we have as many different perspectives as possible around any given table. We try to engage in very collaborative discussions across the institution, and we sort of have a policy of there can't be any smartest people in the room. And we say that because the smartest person in the room always is taking up so much space that they're drowning out the voice of others. And often, as Liz mentioned, those are the men, right, who are accustomed to having the pulpit to as long as they want and to say essentially anything they want without being checked. So we're constantly pulling each other in when there are missteps, and it can create a complicated dynamic and culture of navigating hurt feelings and justified sort of flights and microaggressions and the rest. But we get better and better at it every day.
Thank you very much. I think we're going to be cut off in at the latest a minute, so I'd rather say goodbye and thank you to everyone here now instead of being cut off mid-sentence. But thank you all very much for bearing with us. Thank you for participating in the questions, in the polls. Thank you for to Ampis, who was thrown off for not freaking out, or just very slightly maybe. Look at the resources we gave you, and I hope to read some of you next week in the next webinar on visitor research, which I'm going to attend as a participant, and keeping my thumbs crossed, my thumbs pressed, my fingers crossed, just so things will get smoothly. Okay, I'm being prompted to suggest ways to continue the conversation. Well, we can, I think, write to you all because we've got all your email addresses. If we can, I don't know. That's the difficult part. That's where I don't have a good answer. You can continue asking questions here and talking to the experts and to yourself, who are all probably also experts, because there's no smartest person in the room, just in the ask a question thing. Keep spreading the good words in your institutions and to people who may not know yet that they need this information. Yeah. But thank you very much. This was great. Oh yeah, and you can also continue on a Twitter hashtag. Go to Ecsite Online and we'll find a good hashtag to go with that. But yes, let's talk on Twitter. Ecsite Online has all our numbers, our links, names. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. And someone else has to end it. Goodbye.